the advice to people considering moving to the country is that if you are professionally motivated to want to do something at any level, the opportunities are there. The lifestyle is fantastic. There's clearly less traffic jams. Usually you're near a beach or a park or a nice walk somewhere like that, but don't not move purely because you don't think you'll be professionally satisfied or the opportunity to generate a comfortable lifestyle or living is not there in the country, because it absolutely is.
This is the Deep in the Weeds podcast. I'm Anthony Huckstep. Over the last year, we've talked to many hospitality professionals seeking a tree change, a chance to ply their trade in less frantic surrounds and get a greater connection to the produce and wine that form the basis of a dining experience in a region. Regional restaurants might be booming, but the push in regional areas for better food started long ago, and there are some quiet achievers that have been integral in the sense of place and real culinary identity emerging in different parts of Australia. Matt Dempsey is the owner of Conlan's Wine Store, the Belfast Port Fairy, and co-owner of Tulip in Geelong. Matthew, how are you going?
Morning, Huck. How are you? I'm going well, thanks.
Mate, it's good to hear your voice. I haven't seen you in about a decade. You've been busy in regional Victoria, setting up amazing restaurants. You've been in Port Fairy 6 years. What led you to go to Port Fairy?
I guess my wife and I come back most years because my mum and all my family are from here. So every year with the kids, we come down in January and experience the beautiful sunny summer days. And I'd often say to her, we should move here. And that went on for quite a while. And eventually one day she said yes. So we put the house on the market in Geelong, and it sold a little quicker than we anticipated, which I guess forced us to really, get serious and take the plunge. So we moved down with the kids, and it was just a good year for us. Our oldest was going from primary school into secondary school, and our youngest was about to start primary school. So, and the middle guy, he was obviously in the middle. So it's just good timing for us 6 years ago.
Were you involved with some pretty amazing restaurants in Geelong? Was it hard to leave and make that move?
It was. The lifestyle was very appealing to us to come down here, so that made it easier. But I guess that the first probably 9 months was quite a challenge for me. In that Gladioli was still running at a pretty high level in Inverleigh, so to give a geographical context to that, that's 2 hours on the dot at that point from where we were living. So I was driving 2 hours to work and then 2 hours from work. And,
wow.
That was a pretty big commitment, 5 days a week. And then I slowly was able to phase out of that by replacing myself with other staff on particular days of the week or mornings of the week. So that first 9 months was a real challenge.
Tell us about Port Fairy. Is there some good produce in that area? It's a well-known place, but many Australians haven't been there.
That's right. It's a beautiful little town. In fact, one of the, voted only 6 or 8 years ago as one of the best little small communities in the world to live in.
Wow.
It's a really pretty, picturesque town. The locals here are quite protective of the history of it. So there's some lots of heritage listed buildings. There's some beautiful beaches, stunning golf course, lots of nice little restaurants. And I guess probably through my last 6 years, we're starting to see some interesting little boutique producers pop up, which is it seems quite natural given that we get a lot of rain down here. So good growing conditions for beef and lamb and wheat a bit north of here, and small vegetable producers and honey and lots of little things like that. So perhaps a bit behind, but it's really starting to move forward now, which is great.
You've been in the industry for around 25 years. How different is it running a regional restaurant compared to in the city?
I was just reflecting on that the other day. It's 25 years is a pretty long time. I don't feel that old, but when you put it like that, it sounds like a while. I guess I've never run a restaurant in the city, so it's always been, I guess, other than Geelong, it's been always regional for me. Even Inverleigh it's 20 minutes out of Geelong, which doesn't sound far, but it's a town of less than 1,000 people, so that's still quite regional or small in a sense. I guess, when I talk to friends in the city who have restaurants, we face all the same challenges that they face, staffing issues, which seems to be industry-wide at the moment, accessibility to quality product on a daily basis or as you need it's a challenge for us. But that just forces innovation and good planning. I think we need to be able to, for example, order our ducks a week in advance or a week and a half or 2 weeks in advance and commit to an order to make it viable for the producer and for us as well. So we face a lot of the same challenges, but we also have some great lifestyle benefits, which, as you touched on in the intro, I think a lot of people in the industry are starting to see, whether that's in WA or New South or Queensland or Victoria.
Can you tell us a bit about the two venues that you have in Port Fairy? They're in amazing buildings because the town does have a rich history. Tell us a little bit about they're quite different, the offerings.
They are. Conlan started just over 4 years ago now, and that was, I guess, after that first period that I touched on, driving back and forward to Inverleigh every day. I realised within 6 to 12 months that wasn't going to be viable for us long term. And I guess once we started to realise that this is where we're going to live for good, the opportunity to create something down here was on my mind. That particular site was being renovated, and I kind of just out of the blue called the owner who was in there one day and said, could I have a look? And he said yes. And as soon as I walked in, it was probably about maybe a third of the way through its renovation, and had some really beautiful exposed sandstone brickwork done on the rear of the building and also the internal fireplaces. And I was caught immediately and thought, wow, this could make a really cool wine bar. And the concept of the wine bar, loosely termed, was essentially something that Kate and I could just run on our own, just with virtually no staff, to suit our lifestyle as far as the hours that we wanted to work and the amount of work we wanted to put into it. So that was where the idea for that came from. And then we had a lot of issues with council getting permits because it was all kind of new to me, planning permits, which then led to liquor licensing. So we were delayed for quite a bit, and our liquor license came through on New Year's Eve, which was, I guess, a blessing and a bit of an issue. But so we opened that night and just got really smashed, I guess, for the following 4 weeks, because we just went into the busiest 4 week stretch of the year for us down here. And then that led us, I guess, because of the popularity of the venue immediately, we became more of a restaurant than a wine bar. So selling retail wine for me was a new thing. I hadn't been involved in that, so understanding how to do that was one challenge, but then understanding how that flowed onto, I guess, lesser margins if you're selling it in a restaurant. So that was a learning process. And then the Belfast came about 2.5 years ago when I heard from a friend who's an agent here that it was going to come up for sale, and we'd been trying to get into that property for probably nearly 10 years on and off in various ways, and we weren't ready for it. We were a bit, I guess, tired and didn't have a business plan. We didn't have any idea what we would do with it, but we thought if we don't make an offer and try and get the finance, then it might be another 10 years. So we did. The offer got accepted, and then we thought, oh, shit, now what do we do? So it was a really stressful kind of 3 or 4 month period because it was a pretty quick settlement. And then, moved into what was essentially an Asian restaurant that we ran for about 12 months until COVID hit. So,
well, tell us a bit about the history of that building, because it's pretty important to Port Fairy. It's been there since 1865, that building.
That's right, yeah. It's been at council chambers through its journey. It's been a post office as well, but it's central to the town, literally right in the centre of the town. It's a great position, and it was restored to its current standards about 14 years, I think, or 15 years ago. And the guy or the family who renovated did a fantastic job. So it had been run down when we come into it. We needed to spend, I guess, unexpectedly quite a lot of money to bring it back to where it is, but all the bones were there. So the floor was still in really good condition. A lot of the furniture was in really good condition. Structurally, it's all really well built. So it's a beautiful building. The facade's obviously heritage listed like a lot of properties in the town, but it's quite a big venue as well. So we like the appeal of that because we can sort of, when it's quiet or during COVID, for example, we can have an intimate dining room of, say, 15 on a quiet Monday night in the middle of winter, or maybe 50 during summer, which is what we've been operating at. But we can go up to 200 because it's licensed for 200. So it's, it's a pretty versatile building in that regard.
What was it like creating that restaurant and the sort of food to offer with that obligation of that rich history within the building and the importance of that to the town? Can you tell us a bit about what you do with the food and the offering?
Well, I guess to go back a step, we started with an Asian restaurant, which didn't really meet any of those historical obligations at all. In fact, it was quite it was like trying to push a square peg in a round hole kind of scenario. But the learning from opening Tulip in Geelong after Gladioli originally was that if they are perceived to be too similar, you can really damage one business. So we're really conscious of that. We didn't want to go down the path of having something that directly competed with Conlan's because they're literally 200 metres apart. They're really quite close. And being such a small town, we didn't want to kill one business or take away from that to open a second. So we went for Asian, accessible, but found it a really challenging business model to run and learnt a lot through that period, but it really took a lot out of us emotionally as well. It was really hard, stressful 12 months. And when COVID hit, ironically for us in that particular business, it was almost like a bit of a circuit breaker, and it was kind of like, let's get out of this and go to what we were going to do, which was, I guess, a sort of steak, seafood orientated kind of menu. So we reopened as that after the first shutdown last year, middle of June, and immediately was well received. I was really price sensitive to begin with, but we've had no issues whatsoever. So it's about trying to deliver good service. We have about 4 or 5 steaks on the menu, quite a good representation of seafood. Yeah, we've been pretty fortunate to be able to get the concept right now, and it's just a matter of executing daily and trying to achieve what we wanted to do.
You mentioned that Port Fairy's one of the most beautiful towns to live in. How important are tourists to the offerings that you have and the success of them?
Well, they're obviously really important. Like a lot of seasonal small towns scattered around the coastline of Australia, we fluctuate heavily depending on the weather usually and holiday periods. I guess the silver lining for us through the COVID was that when Victorians couldn't travel interstate, they come and visited us, which was fantastic. So a lot of people who would normally have gone overseas to Europe or to America or to Northern Australia spent time with us last year, which is great. For us personally, we focus heavily on trying to offer interesting events and menus and connect with our local community, because we see that that's where our sustained long-term success or viability comes from. If we can keep our locals happy and continually returning, then the tourism trade is a bonus on top of that. And conversely, we're not as affected if we have a quieter tourist season because we're still getting good local visitation. Obviously, there's levels of fluctuation in that, but we strongly try and price and have product that appeals to the local area. And that's not just Port Fairy because it's a small town. There's only 2,500 people here, but Warrnambool's 20 minutes away and that's about 40,000 people. Some of the surrounding areas as well have people come and visit from Hamilton or Ballarat or Geelong. So, yeah.
You've won hats, you've won Young Chef of the Year, many accolades. Where did it all start for you? Why did you enter the industry?
It came about, I guess, when I was 15. Some family of mine owned a restaurant in Port Douglas in North Queensland. So I went up there on school holidays and spent a couple of weeks with an uncle. And during that 2-week period that I spent with him, I worked in his restaurant maybe 6 or 8 times, just making garlic spreads, ironically. But I was immediately hooked on the buzz of service. It was almost the young chefs all talk about the adrenaline rush of a busy service, and that hooked me immediately. I was thinking, wow, this is really cool. It was a vibrant, happening town, and Port Douglas back in 95 and 96 and 97 through to probably 2000 was, a great luxury resort town with famous people from all over the world, and that lifestyle really appealed to me. So I went back and said to Mum, I'd like to become a chef. And she said, well, if you can get a job, you can leave school. But if you don't get a job, you can't leave school. So it was either that or a bit of a left field one, but some sort of gardening or landscaping I was really interested in also. But, yeah, so I got a job in Port Douglas and moved up there after year 11 and did my apprenticeship up there for 4 years. So that's how I got into the industry.
Wow. What's been some of the key moments that have helped shaped the direction that you've gone in?
I think when you reflect on your career, lots of things influence your journey and your path. That's people that you encounter. Probably some of the early ones was I had a great head chef when I was in my second year, and he said, if you're serious about cooking, you've got to go to Melbourne. So I was able to tee up a couple of stages and job interviews at some of the better restaurants there, and that really helped, I guess, set me on the path to wanting to cook nice food and have an understanding and respect for, I guess, sort of higher end stuff. And that doesn't mean that I have no respect for other things, but it certainly opened my eyes to the possibilities of the industry. So I got a job interview, which was a 3-day job interview back in those days, at SSS, which was a legendary restaurant at the time by Donovan Cook and Philippa Sibley. And I probably had more career-shaping experiences in that 3-day than I have in the last 24 years. There was times where, well, most of the time I just wished that the ground would open up and swallow me. I was so out of my depth. I was embarrassed. I was humiliated. It was a real eye-opener. But out of that came the desire to want to get to that level. And that, I guess, drove the passion that I had to want to really push hard within the industry. So there was some funny experiences when I think about it now.
You are still co-owner with Tulip, and you mentioned Gladioli and letting go of that to move to the country because travelling was just too much. Those restaurants are award-winning restaurants. What was it like running those and having the pressures of things like hats and setting those sort of standards?
Well, I guess for anybody in that position, you probably identify immediately, but it's a daily challenge. There's always an underlying sense of pressure and expectation from your customers, which usually is self-driven. We know we're all our own harshest judges and biggest critics, but it can be a huge high if you're seeking accolades. We all say no, we're not, but ego is a massive part of being a chef, especially one who pushes, and secretly you always hope you'll get a hat or 2 hats or whatever it is. So, and anybody who says that they aren't motivated by that is probably not really telling the full truth. But I think as you get older, that certainly, it's still nice to be considered in that way, but it's not a motivator these days. It's about running viable businesses and having happy staff and happy customers. But during that period, it was a lot of hours, always wanting to create something. It can be a really challenging environment in that respect, but as I said, really rewarding as well if you open the paper and get a great review. But you learn a lot through that process also. It was probably, I guess, coming out of Petterville, which was a hatted restaurant for the 8 years that I was there, and then into having Gladioli, which was 2 hatted for multiple years as well. It was a pretty long period of time, and it's nice to now, I shouldn't say not seek that, but certainly it's not a driving force for us. We have no interest in it at all. It's about just cooking nice food and presenting comfortable, happy experiences for people.
Is there any dishes that you remember, look back on fondly from the Gladioli days that you think sort of typified that period of time in your cooking career?
There probably would be. I don't have anything that springs to mind as such. We moved the menu relatively quickly. It was all sort of seasonal, so we'd see repeat season on season, year after year, similar styles or methods. But I guess probably one of the things that I reflect on with fondness is during that period is just the connections with the suppliers. It was really about meeting people who had interesting products. So there was a great company out the road called Bow and Lamb who we were heavily involved with in development for their products. Anthony at Greenvale Farm, who had the fantastic free-range heritage bred pork, and Jody down at Great Ocean Ducks popped up around that time. So a lot of those memories and relationships are great memories for me. And I guess the dishes that come from those were what we were about at that particular time.
You mentioned that you're cooking a bit differently these days and you actually have head chefs and sort of run the establishment. So how influential are you on the food offering at the moment with the 2 venues?
I guess probably as I have as little influence now as I've ever had, to be honest. I actually work out the front most of the time and have done for quite a while. So I have a real passion for wine and wine producers, and they're actually really similar to premium producers of beef or pork or whatever else it is as well. They really care about their farming and their production methods. But as far as the food goes for us now, we've got one head chef and he oversees both restaurants, and the guys kind of work between the 2 venues as well. And despite us having 2 venues, are actually really low staff. So once COVID hit, we probably lost, I'd say 15 to 20 staff, and we're now running with about probably 8 between the two, which is as low as it's ever been. But those guys, they'll come for guidance or advice on a technique or a product or a price point or a style, how it might fit into the menu and the feel. But other than that, I don't have much say unless I see something that doesn't look right on the day.
You also mentioned how important local producers were to the success of Gladioli. What are the local producers like around you and working with those for your menu?
They're popping up, as I touched on at the start. So we're starting to see close to us as an extinct volcano, and around the surrounds of that, there's some great little farms doing potatoes and garlic and berries and stone fruit and all sorts of things. So the guys in the kitchen will stop off there daily or every couple of days and pick up bits and pieces from there. There's a really great biodynamic organic farmer just on the western side of Warrnambool who we buy quite a bit of product through. But I guess for the younger guys in the kitchen, it's that conversation of how do you get enough product or consistency of delivery versus wanting to buy the best product that you can. So we'll talk to them about let's just buy his product and then work out what we're going to do with it, as opposed to going, well, we're going to put this dish on and we have to have it there all the time. So there's a bit of an educational process through that. And then we still have contacts with Jody, as I said, so we buy a bit of duck from her still, and other little small producers around. There's free-range eggs and honey and things like that. So hopefully we'll continue to see more. Yeah.
You mentioned you're in the kitchen less these days and you're on the floor and you have a real passion for wine. Tell us a bit about your wine program there and what do you love about Australian wines?
I think, well, we don't have I guess we don't have a sommelier. We did for quite a while, but I developed a real love of wine when I first started the restaurants. So Belfast has about probably 250 wines on the list, and Conlan's is probably about 200-ish, I'd say, and that varies just season to season, as in who's around and how much stock we're going through. We focus, I guess, on mostly family-owned vineyards within Victoria and around the country. We do have quite a bit of international product as well. As far as Australian goes, I think some of the I think Australia already competes obviously on a world stage, but some of the more recent plantings will become absolute benchmarks within the world. I think some of the product that, as an example, the Farr family at Bannockburn there use Chardonnay and Pinot Noir, the plantings, the clone, the clone choice, the orientation of the rows, the width of the rows, the height. That's world-class farming as far as I can see. And I think the product that's starting to come off that, particularly when they've got 30 or 40 years of family experience at that site, so they know vintage on vintage, the variational changes or the seasonal changes. I'm really excited by some of the product that we see coming from those kinds of producers, not only them, and there's a lot of them around the country. So I think Australia has, and the other thing probably we have is such a diverse climate and geography that you can get great examples of pretty much any varietal if you know where to go for it.
The last year has been pretty challenging for many operators. You mentioned briefly that being a regional operator was an advantage in the sense that people couldn't travel overseas and were hitting the regions and checking them out. What sort of impact did the last year have on what you do in Port Fairy?
I guess from a simple business point of view, we had a real boom in that June-July period once the restrictions down here opened after that 12-week period, and then we got shut again for that 5 or 6 week period, which was pretty dead, obviously, and then we had a really good period from then through until now. So from an economical point of view, it hasn't been disastrous at all for us, other than the fact we were shut for those, I think, 15 or 16 weeks in total. As far as the way that we trade and operate now, it was a really good chance to reset and start to look at some of the things that we have always done and why we do those. And as an example, we have always served coffee, but about, say, I think 5 years ago in all the restaurants, we went to filter coffee only, so really delicious single origin coffee. But we don't do cappuccinos or short blacks or anything like that, or haven't done for that period of time. And so when COVID hit, I actually looked at the figures in relation to our coffee sales at the Belfast because the coffee machine broke. So I was like, well, I don't want to buy a new one or spend more money fitting it if I don't need to. So, and it was making up less than 1% of our annual revenue. It was so low, but obviously the skill that goes along with making a consistently good coffee, the product that goes with it, multiple sorts of milk, coffee, and then the variations on doing those was a highly skilled position. So we took a pretty bold move and just stopped serving coffee full stop.
Wow.
So we actually don't have coffee or tea available anymore. And it actually, if you manage it well, it doesn't present a problem. We get probably 1 in 50 requests who sort of cracks the shits a little bit, but it's just such a small part of our business. And with, 250 or 270 beverage offerings, if they can't find something that's probably, it's certainly the way that we operate anyway, it's not a big drama and it won't stop people coming to us because of that. So that was one thing. Our booking times, we got really, I guess, quite articulate on how we do those. We're able to tighten up our service times, offering good service still, but in a far more condensed period. So rather than having 8 people in after 8 or 8:30 or 9 o'clock at night, where we're probably throwing away any profit that we made in the first sitting, we actually now just won't take that if there's no demand to do a bigger sitting. So a lot of those kinds of things. And we're trading less. The staff are getting a better life or work-life balance. And the bottom line from a profitability point of view is probably better because of that. The revenue may not be at the same level, but we're making more money out of it. So there's a lot of learning in regards to those little things, booking deposits. So there's been a lot of things we've reflected on. I thought, why do we do it? Do we have to do it? How will people see our business if we don't do it or change the way we do it or introduce it for that matter?
How important has moving to the country, I know you said it was 6 years ago, how important has that been to you and that sort of work-life balance? Has that experience changed you and the way you approach your career?
100%. For me, it has personally. So when we're at our peak as far as busyness down here, we had the 3 venues and probably 25 or 30 staff between them, and there was periods where I was able to have random Saturdays off or Thursday night off. So the last 3 or 4 or 5 years, I've been able to get involved with local community through the cricket club. So I'm the president of the cricket club, which I really love. I've been able to be involved in coaching football and helping coach football at a couple of local teams, and played cricket a little bit over the last few years. Things that, as a chef or a career hospitality person, you just forego or just think that you'll never get the chance to do. So, and yes, you can do that in the city as well, but it kind of, for me, was the circuit breaker, I guess, to really just say, well, why do we do this? Do we need to chase hats all the time, or can we just try and have a business that suits our lifestyle, that provides enough income to live off? We're never going to be millionaires. We don't drive Maseratis. I drive a little Volkswagen Golf still, and I love it. But I think when you get to, for us anyway, we sort of said, well, why are we doing this? And always compromising Easters and birthdays and Christmas when, perhaps we don't have to do that anymore. So.
Well, you've made a real success of that move to the country, and the regional dining has just really boomed in the last decade, and you've been a part of that. What sort of advice would you give to hospitality professionals looking for that sort of tree change, whether it's to buy a restaurant or even just work in them?
I think probably the best advice I can give is that one of the things that really struck me, I guess right up until I was involved in the Appetite for Excellence program, so that was 10 years ago or 11 years ago, and there was always, through my first 10 years in the industry, there was always a city versus country kind of mentality, not in a competitive sense, but they were seen as different for some reason. So we'd go to the Good Food Guide every year, and there was always a best new country restaurant, and then there was always a best new city restaurant, and there was always a best country wine list and a best city wine list. And I couldn't quite work that out because I'd never worked in the city. It just didn't make any sense to me. I didn't understand why they were different. So I began to think to myself, is one hat in country not as good as one hat in city, or is this wine list in the country not as good? And I guess through the Appetite for Excellence program, getting exposure to meeting a lot of chefs and restaurateurs and waiters from those city restaurants, I began to realise that they're actually just exactly the same. The best regional restaurants are as good, if not better, than the best city restaurants. There's no difference in my mind on that. So the advice to people considering moving to the country is that if you are professionally motivated to want to do something at any level, the opportunities are there. The lifestyle is fantastic. There's clearly less traffic jams. Usually you're near a beach or a park or a nice walk somewhere like that. And again, those things are available in the cities, but don't not move purely because you don't think you'll be professionally satisfied, or the opportunity to generate a comfortable lifestyle or living is not there in the country, because it absolutely is.
Mm-hmm. Well, the last year has been challenging for many, and being in Port Fairy has been a benefit because people have been travelling there, and it's helped keep the business afloat. What are you expecting for the next year? What's your hope for 2021?
I think we sort of down here are at least expecting solid visitation tourism-wise for the rest of this year. I think with the uncertainty around domestic travel, people reluctant to book interstate because the premiers are happy to close them overnight. We're seeing, or the bookings, I guess, forward bookings accommodation-wise are really solid down here, and I think that'll continue on. From us as a business or operators, we're really conservative still. So we've traded at probably about 70% of what we normally would do. But even today, before I started talking to you, just watching a couple of new COVID cases in Victoria, if we're listed as an exposure site, for example, we'll be closed for a week or two. So having enough money in the bank to pay the staff is really important for us. Being up to date with our bills is really important. So there's a real level of conservatism around. I don't think, for us anyway, I don't think we're out of the weeds. Pardon the pun. At this point in time, we'll still trade quite conservatively for the next 6 to 12 months until vaccine kicks in and we see what results that shows.
Well, Matt, it's been really great to catch up with you. Congratulations on the venues down there. I know they're very popular, and people should go and check them out. We've loved having you on Deep in the Weeds today. Please keep in touch, and we'll talk again soon.
Thanks, Huck. Appreciate the time. It's nice to catch up.
This is the Deep in the Weeds podcast. I'm Anthony Huckstep. Stay tuned as we share the stories of Australia's hospo community, suppliers and producers in search of hope during this pandemic. Special thanks to executive producer Rob Locke for making this all happen. Follow us on Instagram at Deep in the Weeds Podcast, or email us at podcast@deepintheweeds.com.au. Stay safe and be well.